There once was an old woman whose eyes had become dim, ears dull of hearing, and her mind wandered to places only she was familiar with. Her family would often find her hitchhiking, naked, down the road south of Happy Camp, California, along the Klamath River, which is just south of the Oregon border. Her daughter and son-in-law became increasingly disturbed by her behavior. She would be walking along jagged cliffs over the river. Her feet would be bare. They would be bleeding. People would find her. She would be speaking languages that no one could understand. They asked the relatives for help, and the relatives really saw her as a family embarrassment. And they said, just put the old coot in a rest home north of Seattle, and we'll come and see her when we can. And that's what they did. I, on the other hand, at 18 years old, saw my grandmother, Sadie, as a wise, loving woman who took care of me when I was a young child. My fondest memories are walking down to my bedroom at night, where she would open the door, turn on the lights, tell me to stand and watch, and she would enter the room, pull out her sword, and she would slay all the dragons, alligators, and creatures that were lying under my bed. And then she would pick me up, tuck me in, and say, "You're safe now." And then she would tell me stories of fanciful and far-off places, and my imagination would just soar. And then she would sing me my favorite song just before I fell asleep. And it's my favorite song to this day. And many of you know it, and if you do, please feel free to sing along with me. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Grandma's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird won't sing, Grandma's gonna buy you a diamond ring. And if that diamond ring turns brass, Grandma's gonna buy you a looking glass. And by then my eyes would be closing. I would be drifting into a very peaceful sleep, listening to the rain in Seattle fall down upon the roof. Well, they did put the old coot into a rest home, and I visited her there after about 4 months. The staff ushered me and her into this dimly lit room with a television. It was supposedly the family room. Dirty tables, windows were closed, shades drawn. It was understaffed, it was dirty, it was no place for anyone to be. When Grandma Sadie came in, she looked at me and didn't recognize me. And we didn't understand it at the time, but she had dementia. And in the 1960s, people didn't really know about Alzheimer's or dementia. And they didn't know what to do with people that were in that particular state of mind. Well, she started talking about things that made no sense to me, and her eyes glazed over. She looked up to the ceiling. And it seemed like this went on for about an hour. Now, I was still transported by her voice back to that 4-year-old. And I just felt my heart leap out towards Grandma Sadie. What seemed like about an hour went by, and all of a sudden, she looked deeply into my soul. Her eyes cleared up. And she said, "Eddie, don't ever put your parents in a death camp like this. This is no place for the living, and I won't be living any longer." And then her eyes glazed over. She looked back to the ceiling and wandered to places that only she was familiar with. 2 weeks later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, and the family had almost a hushed, kind of a guilt-ridden funeral for her. But I never forgot the many lessons that my grandmother had taught me. And in 2012, when my father got Alzheimer's, My mother tried to take care of him for the first year. She lived about 80 miles away from me in Santa Rosa, California. She lasted about 6 months, but then his behavior became very violent. In the morning, he would wake up and he had hidden something during the night, a credit card, a book, his glasses, boots, wallet, whatever, and he would be in a rage. And one time he grabbed my mother and he slammed her against the wall and said, "You know who took my boot. You go get that boot right now." Well, she couldn't take care of him, so we found him an assisted living facility close by my mother. It was clean. It was much better than the one that Grandma Sadie had been in. Well-staffed, loving, caring people there. But my father had the same problems. He would wake up in a rage in the morning. And until his things were found, he couldn't be brought down from his anger. Well, after about a year, the facility said, "We have to put him in the lockdown ward. He's becoming too dangerous for us." So I wasn't about to let that happen, and I was able to bring him into my house, and I hired my son to take care of him for the first year while I was working. Now, my son had a great idea, and that was to get him a dog. So we found a rescue dog that just happened to be the exact copy of his previous Yorkshire Terrier. And when we asked my dad what he wanted to name the dog, he said, "Oh, how about Susie?" Susie was the name of his old dog, and we would take him to visit Susie and my mother every week. Now, he didn't remember his old Susie. He remembered us and everyone else. His short-term memory was totally gone, and his long-term memory was fine, except for some few details. And when the two dogs would get together, they would have such a great time. And my dad would be in heaven. He'd be holding these two dogs that were just loving and paying attention to him. Another thing that was beneficial for my father is that he would take Susie out for a walk in the morning. Now, after about 3 weeks, we were able to get him to understand the route. And I put 2 scarecrows in our front yard that he could see and know how to get back to his house. So he would take Susie out for a walk, and he'd greet the neighbors, tell them the same stories all over again, and then he would come home. Well, Susie was very smart, because she, maybe after an hour or so, she would look up at him, she'd go, always, "Oh, Susie, you want to go for a walk?" And Susie would go, so we'd take her out for a walk. That might happen 8 to 10 times during the day, and it kept my dad in good spirits and good health. Well, I took care of him for 2 more years with the help of family, friends, and hospice workers. The hospice workers came in the last 6 months. He had developed a heart condition, and his blood didn't flow very well through his system. Towards the end of his life, they were letting us know that it was going to happen very soon. So my son came in for about 2 weeks, and we loved and took care of grandfather. He still knew who my son was and who I was and other family members. My mom had passed at that time. So the morning came when the hospice worker said he won't be with us much longer. So my son dressed him in his finest suit. I put on his hat, and then we held his hands, and we sang to him the song that his mother and my grandmother had sang to us as young children. And please join us. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird won't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring, and if that diamond ring turns brass, Mama's gonna buy you a looking glass. And a few hours later, my father passed peacefully in his sleep. I love you, Dad and Grandma Sadie. Thank you, Grandma, for everything you taught me.